She had the kind of beauty that stopped traffic and made headlines. But behind the pouty lips, the platinum hair, and the bombshell curves that earned her the nickname The Body, Marie McDonald was not born into glamour. No, she was built for it. Crafted, shaped, and sculpted by a studio system that devoured pretty girls for profit. And from the moment she stepped into the spotlight, she was both the dream and the cautionary tale. Before Marie McDonald became a Hollywood headline before the men, the scandals, and the pills, she was just Cora Marie Fry, born in 1923 in Bergen, Kentucky, far from the glittering illusions of Tinseltown. Her father was a violinist and her mother a former Ziegfeld girl, which may have set the stage for her future, but Marie's childhood was anything but idyllic. Her parents divorced when she was just a toddler, and she was raised primarily by her mother, who pushed her hard into the world of beauty and performance. By the time Marie was a teenager, she was already making waves, not in Hollywood, but on the pageant circuit. She won Miss Yonkers at just 15, and from there, the tiaras kept coming. She was crowned Miss Lowe's Paradise, Miss New York State, and even Miss Victory, a World War II era title designed to boost morale among the troops. Her face was appearing in newspapers, her measurements printed alongside her name, and by the time she turned 18, Hollywood had taken notice. But Marie didn't just walk into stardom, she hustled for it. She was determined not to fade into the background like so many other pretty girls. After moving to California, she started out as a singer with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra, showing off not just her looks, but her voice. Still, the movie studios didn't care much for her vocal range. What they saw was a figure, a commodity. And that's when Marie became The Body. It was a nickname coined by gossip columnists and splashed across magazines in bold font. At first, Marie played along. She posed in swimsuits, leaned into the role, and smiled for the flashbulbs. But beneath the surface, she resented it. She once famously snapped, "I wish they'd finish building the rest of me. I'm getting sick of the body." It was a line that hinted at something deeper, a woman who wanted more than to be ogled, a woman aching for validation beyond her curves. Still, Hollywood doesn't reward resistance, and so Marie kept smiling. She signed with Universal Pictures in the early 1940s, and her early film roles were small but eye-catching. She appeared in Pardon My Sarong, 1942, It Started with Eve, and a handful of forgettable B pictures where her main job was to stand still and look stunning. She was a pinup queen during the war years, her photos plastered in barracks across Europe and the Pacific. GIs adored her, but directors and critics remained unimpressed. Behind the scenes, Marie was already learning that being the body was a double-edged sword. The studios wanted her to be sexy, but not too sexy. Desirable, but not threatening. When she tried to take on more dramatic roles, she was ignored. When she pushed for better parts, she was dismissed as difficult. And when she demanded respect, she was laughed off as another ambitious blonde. But Marie wasn't giving up. She signed a contract with Paramount and landed a more significant role in the film Lucky Jordan, 1942, opposite Alan Ladd. Then came Living in a Big Way, 1947, with Gene Kelly, which should have been her big break. It wasn't. The film flopped, and Marie's performance was panned not because she lacked talent, but because the script gave her little to do besides look pretty and play housewife. And that was the story of her career. Always on the edge of a breakout, always a breath away from being taken seriously. But Hollywood had already decided what Marie McDonald was. And once they label you, it's nearly impossible to change the narrative. So Marie adapted, at least outwardly. She leaned harder into the sex symbol persona. She bleached her hair even blonder, cinched her waist tighter, and said all the right things in interviews. But behind closed doors, she was already beginning to spiral. She had tasted fame, but not the respect she craved. She had money, but no real power. And she was about to enter the part of her life that would make headlines for all the wrong reasons. Because for Marie McDonald, beauty came first, but scandal would come second. By the late 1940s, Marie McDonald had achieved what most girls only dreamed of. She was a household name, a tabloid fixture, and a fantasy draped in satin. But behind the camera flashes and fur coats was a woman struggling to maintain her grip on reality, trapped in a world that dressed her like a doll and threw her away like one, too. After years of playing nameless pretty girls on screen, Marie's career had started to stall. Hollywood, ever hungry for fresh meat, was already lining up a new crop of blondes to take her place. Lana Turner, Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield bombshells were a dime a dozen. And if you weren't constantly reinventing yourself, you'd be forgotten in a blink. So Marie clung to what still gave her currency in Tinseltown: her beauty, her body, and her headline-making personal life. She became the kind of woman gossip columnists lived for: unpredictable, glamorous, and always entangled with the wrong kind of man. And it started, as many Hollywood tragedies do, with a marriage that looked like a fairy tale on the outside, and was anything but on the inside. In 1943, Marie married Vic Orsatti, a former football player turned powerful Hollywood agent. He had charm, clout, and connections, and she had everything he wanted on his arm. But their union was explosive. Friends described their fights as volcanic, and the love seemed to come second to the spectacle. Orsatti reportedly tried to control her every move, dictating her career choices and image. Marie, who had already spent years being packaged and paraded by studio heads, chafed under yet another man's authority. They divorced in 1947, and that was only the beginning. Next came Harry Carl, a wealthy shoe magnate and heir to the Carl's shoe store's fortune. At first, it seemed like the ultimate Cinderella story, the glamorous starlet and the millionaire tycoon. They married in 1947, and for a while, it looked like Marie had finally found stability. But fairy tales don't survive in Hollywood. Marie and Harry's relationship was marked by constant upheaval, infidelity rumors, and screaming matches worthy of a Douglas Sirk melodrama. Marie was deeply insecure, and Harry didn't help. He was known for his wandering eye and wallet. The couple had 3 children, but Marie's growing paranoia and emotional volatility made the home anything but happy. She accused Harry of cheating. He accused her of spying. They divorced in 1954. But wait, they weren't done. They remarried just a year later in 1955. A second honeymoon, a fresh start, right? Not even close. The second go-round was worse than the first. Marie's pill use had escalated. Her mental health was declining, and her career had essentially flatlined. She was starring in nightclub acts now, playing Las Vegas showrooms instead of sound stages. The bright lights still shone, but they were flickering fast. By the time Marie and Harry divorced for good in 1958, they had become a walking cautionary tale. Money couldn't buy love, and beauty couldn't guarantee peace. Then came George Capri, a Las Vegas nightclub owner and known associate of mobster Bugsy Siegel. That's right. Marie's love life was now officially brushing shoulders with organized crime. Rumors swirled about Capri's connections and temper. He was flashy, dangerous, and exactly the kind of man Marie was drawn to and destroyed by. Though the marriage was brief and ended quietly, it added to the growing mythology of Marie McDonald as a woman with a self-destructive compass, always pointing toward the worst possible men. In total, she married 7 times, twice to Harry Carl, and once to men who ranged from wealthy businessmen to mysterious playboys. Her final known marriage was to Donald Taylor, a Hollywood producer. That union, too, dissolved in a blur of arguments and accusations. To the world, she was a serial bride, the blonde who couldn't be tamed. But the truth was far more tragic. Marie was desperately searching for safety in all the wrong places. Each marriage seemed like a lifeboat, a chance to finally be seen, understood, protected. But instead, she kept being handed more anchors. In public, she laughed it off. She told reporters, "I believe in marriage. That's why I keep trying it." But behind the rhinestones and rehearsed one-liners was a woman unraveling. She longed to be taken seriously as an actress, as a mother, as a person, but she was constantly reduced to a punchline. The body. The blonde with a black book. The girl who couldn't stay married. The press hounded her, the studios ignored her, the public mocked her, and Marie, caught in the middle, began to crack. And just when the world thought they'd heard the worst, Marie McDonald made front-page news again. This time, she wasn't in a wedding dress. She was in the back of an ambulance, claiming she'd been abducted at gunpoint. What followed would become one of the strangest, most controversial stories in Hollywood history. By January of 1957, Marie McDonald had been through the ringer 7 marriages, a stalled career, tabloid ridicule, and mounting personal instability. She had tasted the heights of fame and felt the sting of its slow, humiliating fade. But no one, not even her closest confidants, could have predicted the headline that would hit newsstands that chilly January day. "Marie McDonald kidnapped," screamed the papers. It was sensational, outrageous, and completely on brand for a woman dubbed the Body, a woman whose every move seemed scripted for a noir film. According to Marie, two men had burst into her Los Angeles home, forced her into a car at gunpoint, and held her hostage for over 24 hours before dumping her on the side of a desert highway near Indio, California. She had a cut lip, disheveled clothes, and looked by all accounts shaken. She said the men had blindfolded her, tied her up, and driven her for hours. They didn't rape her. She claimed they just talked to her. Why? She didn't know. Maybe they were hired to scare her. Maybe it was random. Maybe, she said, it had something to do with Harry Carl, her ex-husband, whom she had just divorced a second time weeks earlier. And for a moment, a brief, electrifying moment, the world held its breath. Marie was back in the spotlight. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. Detectives poked around her story with a mix of skepticism and concern. But it didn't take long before the doubts began creeping in. And then, crashing through the door. The police found inconsistencies. Marie's story changed first. The men were strangers. Then, maybe she'd seen one of them before. The timeline didn't quite match up. There were no signs of forced entry at her home. No witnesses, no ransom demands. And then came the most damning piece. Marie had recently been under psychiatric care, had suffered what doctors described as emotional disturbances, and had overdosed on sleeping pills more than once in the previous year. Whispers turned to headlines. Was it all a hoax? Her ex-husband Harry Carl seemed to think so. He told reporters she was very sick and publicly accused her of fabricating the entire event as a cry for help, or worse, a publicity stunt. The LAPD wasn't ready to charge her with filing a false report, but they quietly closed the investigation without results. The message was clear. Nobody believed her. And just like that, Marie McDonald went from victim to villain, from a woman in distress to a laughingstock. The headlines changed their tune fast. Now it was, "The Blonde Who Cried Wolf," or "Publicity Kidnapping, Starlet's Tale Unravels." Her credibility, already worn thin, was shredded. She had become a punchline, a cautionary tale. Overnight, the public turned. Friends stopped calling, studios stopped casting, and Marie, who had always walked a tightrope between glamour and collapse, now had no safety net. But here's the thing. No one wanted to talk about. What if it had really happened? What if Marie had been abducted by men with unknown motives? What if the inconsistencies in her story were the result of trauma, not deception? Would anyone have believed her? Or had she already been so pigeonholed as a dramatic, desperate woman that truth didn't matter anymore? Whatever the reality, Marie's reputation never recovered. The scandal haunted her. Offers dried up completely. Even the nightclub gigs became rare. She was no longer the sexy headliner or tabloid vixen. She was the unstable ex-star who staged a fake crime. Whether she was a victim or an architect, the result was the same. Her career was effectively over. And as for her mental health, it was fraying fast. She was prescribed barbiturates, antidepressants, sleeping pills, a cocktail of the era's deadliest cures. Doctors recommended rest, quiet, privacy. But how could Marie find peace when the very machine she built her life around fame had turned its back on her? This was no longer a story about a bombshell blonde. It was the slow-motion crash of a woman who'd been objectified, mocked, and broken by the very town that once crowned her its queen. And heartbreakingly, Marie wasn't done yet. There were more overdoses, more failed relationships, and ultimately, a final descent that would leave even her harshest critics shaken. But before we get there, the love life roller coaster wasn't quite over. One last marriage, one final betrayal, and a goodbye no one saw coming. By the late 1950s, Marie McDonald's name had become synonymous with spectacle, and not the kind that landed you a Hollywood comeback. She was a tabloid curiosity, a cautionary tale, the body who couldn't seem to keep a man. Her story spinning out like a melodrama no screenwriter would dare pitch. But Marie? She wasn't done yet. Not with love, not with heartbreak, and not with making headlines. Enter George Capri, her seventh and final husband. George was a wealthy Las Vegas nightclub owner, charming, well-dressed, and dangerously mysterious. To Marie, he represented stability, a powerful man with money, connections, and the ability to protect her from the wolves. Or so she hoped. They married in 1963, and for a moment it looked like maybe, just maybe, she'd found peace. Marie had begun to speak of a comeback, of producing her own projects, even dabbling in writing. But the cracks appeared almost immediately. George Capri was controlling, suspicious, and prone to violent jealousy. He didn't want a starlet wife. He wanted a woman who would disappear into his shadow. He didn't get one. Marie, even at her most fragile, had a fire in her that refused to dim. Arguments between them were frequent, vicious, and public. Friends described their marriage as a war zone in tuxedos. Capri, it seemed, wasn't just threatened by Marie's past fame, he was furious about her inability to let it go. And then, of course, there were the pills. Marie had been prescribed barbiturates and tranquilizers for years, a typical remedy in post-war Hollywood for anything from sleeplessness to sadness. But Marie wasn't just using, she was dependent. The high kept the trauma at bay, the heartbreak dulled behind a pharmacological haze. And Capri? He wasn't helping. In fact, some friends later whispered that he encouraged the use it made her easier to control, to isolate. By 1964, the marriage was a shell. They separated after less than a year, and Marie filed for divorce. Capri, ever the gentleman in public but a tyrant behind doors, claimed she was hysterical and unfit. The press barely blinked. Another Marie McDonald divorce? Just another Tuesday in Hollywood. But something was different this time. Marie wasn't just brokenhearted. She was tired. The headlines weren't fun anymore. The scripts had dried up. The nightclubs didn't call. Her exes had all moved on, some happily remarried. Some with successful businesses, others just glad to be rid of her. Marie, once the platinum ideal of wartime fantasy, was now an echo in a town that hated echoes. She tried to keep going. There were whispers of her writing a tell-all, of finally exposing the truth behind her fake friends, abusive lovers, and the kidnapping saga that had never truly been put to rest. But nothing materialized. Producers weren't interested. Publishers passed. Even the scandal rags had turned their attention to fresher meat. The isolation was suffocating. Her children were often with her parents or nannies. She had few visitors. Her Beverly Hills home, once a glamorous playground for Hollywood royalty, grew quiet. The woman who had once stolen the spotlight with a single walk across a soundstage was now alone, floating in a haze of bitterness and barbiturates. And yet, Marie still hoped. She still spoke to friends of a return, of a dramatic reinvention, of proving them all wrong. That resilience, that dangerous, burning optimism was perhaps her most tragic trait. Marie refused to give in. Not fully. Not yet. But it was clear the fairy tale she'd been chasing since girlhood had turned into a nightmare with no waking. She had been used by men, discarded by studios, mocked by the media, and forgotten by the very public that once salivated over every photograph. Her beauty, the asset that once lifted her above the crowd, had become a burden. She was no longer the body. She was the punchline. And behind all of it, beneath the peroxide glamour and tabloid headlines, was a woman who had never been allowed to simply be. Not a wife, not a mother, not a survivor. Just Marie. But that chance would never come. The final curtain was drawing near. By the winter of 1965, Marie McDonald was a woman suspended in time. Once the epitome of blonde bombshell perfection, she now lived in a world of shadows. Fame gone cold, family fractured, and only whispers for company. The lights had dimmed long ago, but Marie clung to the fantasy that they might flicker back on, even for a moment. Instead, they went out for good. On October 21, 1965, a housekeeper entered Marie's quiet Beverly Hills home to find the once glamorous star lying motionless in bed. Bottles of prescription pills were scattered across the nightstand, a hauntingly familiar scene in an era when overdoses had already claimed far too many screen sirens. The news broke within hours. Marie McDonald was dead. She was only 42 years old. To the public, it looked like the final act of a sad and spiraling woman, another tragic overdose, another lost Hollywood soul. The autopsy listed the cause as a possible accidental overdose of barbiturates. It could have been suicide. It could have been carelessness. It might have even been something darker. But what truly rocked the headlines wasn't just Marie's death, it was what happened next. Just 2 days later, her ex-husband, Harry Carl, was found dead in his own home. Yes, the same Harry Carl she had married twice, fought with publicly, and accused of controlling and betraying her. Official cause? A heart attack. But the timing raised eyebrows. 2 deaths in 48 hours. 2 former lovers. Too many unanswered questions. Was it guilt? Coincidence? Or something more sinister? Some whispered that Harry had never truly let Marie go. Others claimed that he knew more about her death than he let on. There were rumors, always unconfirmed, that Marie had threatened to expose secrets, that her accidental overdose might not have been accidental at all. But in the world of old Hollywood, mystery is currency. The truth? It's usually buried beneath 10 layers of legend, scandal, and silence. And perhaps the most unsettling chapter of all was this. In her final days, Marie's closest companion and caretaker was her own father, Everett Fry, a man who had been distant through much of her life, but who now stood as one of the last links to her fading humanity. Fry would later say that Marie had been desperately lonely and not in her right mind. She would often speak to herself, cry for hours, or insist she was being followed. Whether these were the symptoms of mental illness, substance dependence, or the natural byproduct of a life so brutally dismantled, we'll never know. There was no grand funeral, no sweeping Hollywood tribute. Her passing didn't prompt retrospectives or retrospection. She was buried quietly at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, far from the flashing cameras she once courted with ease. No parade of celebrities, no weeping fans. Marie McDonald had died the way so many Hollywood women do, alone, over-medicated and misunderstood. But even in death, she remained an enigma. Was she the manipulative siren who faked her own kidnapping? Or the shattered beauty crushed by a town that devours its own? Was she a narcissist? A fantasist? A drama queen? Or was she a woman who had tried again and again to be loved and was broken every time she reached for it? The truth, like everything in Marie's life, lies somewhere between fact and fantasy. She wanted to be a star. She became one. She wanted to be adored. She was briefly, violently. She wanted a fairy tale ending. But this was Hollywood. And in Hollywood, the fairy tales are always written by someone else. She was born with a face that could stop traffic and a body that made headlines. But what Marie McDonald never had was peace. Behind the studio lights and glossy magazine covers lived a woman who had been chasing something her entire life, not just fame, not just love, but safety, acceptance, a place to belong. She played the role of the perfect pinup, the glittering wife, the troubled starlet. But off camera, her life unraveled into a cautionary tale told in whispers and clippings. From a string of doomed marriages to a kidnapping scandal that still doesn't make sense. From big studio dreams to a quiet death in a lonely bedroom. Marie's story wasn't just tragic, it was hauntingly familiar. Because Hollywood has a type, and it loves nothing more than to raise a woman up, call her a goddess, and then toss her aside when she becomes inconvenient, emotional, or broken. Marie McDonald wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. But she was one of the most unforgettable. And now, maybe, just maybe, she won't be forgotten. Thank you for listening to this episode. If this story gripped you, broke your heart, or made you see Hollywood a little differently, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. We have more stories like this because in Tinseltown, there's always another secret, another scandal, and another star who paid the ultimate price for wanting too much. Until next time, stay curious.